Hi, welcome to Say It, I Dare You, the podcast where we pull apart personal meanings of taboo and hard to say words and phrases with fun guests and some gentle peer pressure. I'm Quinn, and today's word is bisexual. I told you that this podcast might push the gay agenda, and I'm a woman of my word. Just kidding. But as somebody who is part of the 2S LGBTQ plus community, this word gets trivialized almost as much as it gets erased. And I definitely want to talk about it. So today we are joined by my wonderful friend, Karen Chalmers. Hi, Karen.
Hello.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited. Karen, in my personal opinion, is a bi icon. She's been married for 23 years. She's a mom to two teenagers. She was born and raised in Toronto, but now lives in a small town in southwestern Ontario. Sorry. Just kidding. She is the VP of marketing at a software startup, a musician, an actor, a theater nerd, which we get along with just swimmingly on that point. Just all around a creative person, a wonderful person. We've worked together. We've been friends, and I'm really excited to talk to her about this. So we'll dive right into the juicy details like as we get through it. But I wanted to start with why you relate to this episode title.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go back and can we trademark the term bicon?
Yeah. Oh,
yes.
Bicon. Karen Chalmers Bicon.
Yes.
It's like instead of MBA, it's like Karen Chalmers brackets Bicon.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love it. So sorry, repeat the question because I got sucked into my own world there for a sec.
Just why do you relate to this episode title?
Oh, I mean, it's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a word that I have learned to become identified with because, I don't know, growing up as a kid, a teenager in the 90s, you didn't necessarily say, hey, I'm bisexual. Like you just kind of figured your shit out. But as I've grown into a mostly fully formed adult, I'm not going to say fully formed because that's a lie. But as I've grown into the person I am now, I think that that's it is a realistic term that describes who I am and why I identify with it.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people take a long time to kind of get into a comfortable queer identity. Like I identified as bisexual when I first came out. And now I identify as queer or lesbian. And it took me a really long time to even let go of bisexual because there was like a comfort. I was like, I already told everyone. I don't want to tell them again. Like that's overdrawn.
Is that double coming out?
Yeah, seriously. But as if we don't do that like every day of our lives. Do you still find it difficult to talk about this identity in certain settings?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I'm married to a man with two kids and it's complicated. It's people make assumptions about your identity right away about you, right? Like it's the right identity, but it's not one that I'm like, telling everybody in the world about, although I'm doing this, which is an interesting choice. But also I think that, because it's complicated, because people make assumptions, like when I attend pride events and stuff, they assume that it's not necessarily for me.
Right.
So it's an interesting kind of, way to live. And I think that the other thing is like, it's not, you're not leading with sexuality in your daily conversations with people. So when I introduce myself, I don't say, hi, I'm Karen, I'm bisexual. Yeah. I say, hi, I'm Karen. And then when they ask about my family situation, I tell them about my family situation. And then they make assumptions,
right?
Because of that. So yeah, I think that it's something I live very comfortably with. Obviously my husband, is very comfortable with it. Knew right from the get-go, right? It wasn't something that he was, blindsided with or anything like that. But definitely it took a while for me to figure out how to explain my life situation to my kids.
Right. Yeah. Oh, we're going to get into that.
and to friends, right? Because some friends didn't really know, that I had, sexual experiences with women before or anything like that. Yeah. So and especially as I've gotten older in my age, those experiences are kind of far behind me too, because I'm married and I have chosen monogamy, right? So it's really, it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's really complicated
is a very great way to put it.
Yeah.
And I feel like you and I, when we first met, Karen and I know each other because we used to work together when we were corporate baddies way back when. It was like 2 years ago. But I feel like it was such an open conversation between you and I because my sexuality is such a like bold part of my life. It's a little bit less avoidable because people ask about my family situation. I'm like, oh, I live with my partner with her. And then it's like, okay, now we're talking about it.
Yep.
It would not be the bisexual episode if we weren't talking about bi erasure, which for folks who maybe don't know that term or haven't heard it before, it's kind of known as like people in the queer community and heterosexual people will kind of ignore bisexuality as an identity for a myriad of judgments, reasons, stereotypes, whatever. But it's almost like this idea of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the community, you know, pick a side is often something that is heard, yuck, yuck, yuck. But it is also, I think, used more so against folks like you who are in hetero-passing relationships or situations or cis-passing situations as such. So can you tell me a little bit more about your experience with bi erasure? Like, I know you've experienced it. But.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've gotten that. Well, you were just bi curious, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, if my husband passed away, I often joke with him actually that he's kind of ruined me for men, but not in the way that's like negative, like in the way that's super positive, that like he set the bar so high that there's no other God that's ever going to be able to, you know, keep up.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've said my next partner, if you passed away, would be a woman. Like that's definitely my life path. Right. And not that I hope that he passes away. Like that clear. but I think that the idea of you know, kind of, you know, just being bi-curious, that's not actually something that's who you are, or you know, even just being shocked. Oh, you go by the term bisexual? Oh, I wouldn't have thought that. I mean, I knew you were with some women and stuff, but I wouldn't think that
it's part of your identity.
It's actually who you are. Like, really, it's almost like there's the idea that you want to be part of the queer community.
Yes.
But you're not really.
Yeah.
You're not really. And I think that, like, you know, more and more now that we're kind of talking more about people and their sexuality, it's becoming part of that conversation. But, you know, I wouldn't, like, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have said I was bi, probably.
Yeah. I was going to kind of pry about whether or not you feel like you've maybe even had a hand in your own like version of bi erasure in terms of like comfortable settings or leaning on the hetero-passingness of your relationship to make a situation more comfortable.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Guilty as charged, because it is, I mean, like I was saying earlier, it's complicated, right? And it's also something like that concept of bi erasure, like it didn't exist before, right? Like it wasn't even something that you would consider because it wasn't considered, right? Like I think that I've always kind of been who I am, but just because I didn't talk about my sexuality in really explicit ways, I don't know that I was I was contributing to it, but I wasn't doing it knowingly. Yeah. Right. Like I think that, and then now that it's something that I consider and going, oh yeah, you know, I'm actually part of a problem and I can be part of a solution. Yeah. Right. So it's an interesting point to be in. And I think that this is probably something typical of somebody in my generation. Like I'm in my late 40s. Right. So I grew up in a time where, you know, kids who came out in school, you were gay or lesbian. Yeah. That was it. Yeah. Gender fluidity, trans, anything like that. Nobody exclaimed that in the 90s at all. Mm-hmm. I think what's happening now is so wonderful, but it's such a different version of, you know, what adolescence looked like for me, for sure.
Yeah. And I think I can definitely attest to the power of somebody in your generation, somebody in your position, in terms of like when Karen and I worked together, you were technically my boss, and the comfort level that it brought me when you came out as somebody who is also queer, to be like, oh, there is power in having the conversation, not just within yourself, because, you know, getting rid of your own internal bi erasure and like understanding your own identity, but the power that it had, at least speaking from myself, to other queer folks who are like, oh, like this is a safe space. This is somebody
Right.
who's like part of my community. I probably, the day that you told me you were bi, I told everyone I knew and loved, I was like, my boss is gay. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to like the job. Like it made such a difference in my comfort. Not that you weren't a warm, welcoming, I assumed you were straight, like guilty as charged, as you said. But having those conversations can be really important. Oh, hey, Quinn here with a quick little break to thank the sponsor of today's podcast, Joni. Joni is all about 21st century period care. They ditch the stigma and the chemicals on their mission to make sustainable accessible with their organic, chemical-free period care products. I think one of Joni's most impactful business contributions is their eco-friendly approach to period care products. They are thoughtfully designed to be biodegradable and compostable, contributing to minimal environmental impact. Serving as an eco-conscious option for those who prefer one-time use products, like myself, Joni pads and tampons promote progress towards a sustainable future. They are also a vegan brand that never tests on animals, so just truly a wholesome approach to a market that is traditionally pretty wasteful. You can go to getjoni.com/SIIDY for 10% off site-wide. That's getjoni.com/SIIDY for Say It I Dare You for 10% off. Joni spelt Joni. Happy shopping! I guess my next question being that, like, within the queer community, almost like you said, like one foot in, one foot out, like you're not gay enough to be gay, you're not straight enough to be straight. Have you felt a sort of like resistance from queer folks or queer community, or an unwelcoming?
I mean, not really, to be honest. And I think that that's probably maybe because of the timing in which that I'm declaring more so outwardly. I think maybe if I had been like in the 90s saying, well, I'm bi, and, you know, that was kind of all, you know, my entire identity, I probably would have, you know, going out to bars and stuff in the 90s would have been like, well, you know, but you're not really, you know,
right.
You're not part of my sphere of influence. Mm-hmm. But now I think that there's, in particular, I live, you know, like I said, I live in small town southwestern Ontario, which, you know, you would think is very biased against queer people in general. Mm-hmm. And there's definitely a lot of that. There's no doubt. But we have a great Pride committee who is really welcoming and is just lovely to be around. And never once in my own small community have I been able to or have felt, you know, awkward or unable to talk about who I am. So
good. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. It's pretty rad.
So what exactly, if there was one, was your turning point, that pivotal moment that allowed you to be like, you know what, that is my identity, both inward and outward, I guess. What changed for you? Why are you more comfortable talking about it now?
So I think inward it's was way before outward. I guess that's the case with most queer people.
Yeah. Just a couple years in the closet. Been there, done that.
But I think the interesting thing is that, like, for inward, like I've always loved women. I've always loved men. I find them equally, you know, interesting to me. And I always kind of, like, even to my friends, you know, like, it was no surprise to them that I had interest in women as well. Mm-hmm. But I think to actually identify and be outward to people that I didn't know or didn't know well, like the first time you and I met, I think was when I told you, right? So it wasn't like that stage of being, you know, out externally probably was only like 5 years ago for me. And, you know, I'm getting on the age of dirt now. So not really, but
not at all.
Well,
I remember going through this thing we worked together with at our old job, where we were like script writing for you to speak at an event, and you were like trying to be like, oh, my name's Karen Chalmers, and you're like, do I say that I'm gay? Like, what is the value? And we really like dove into, like, I think it was way too long of a conversation, because not in a negative way, but just it was a huge thing to discuss and to figure out whether or not you were comfortable speaking in front of a room of people.
Well, yeah.
Hey, I'm bi.
Well, you know, there was particularly at that point, you know, I had spoken about it externally with people, but not like declared it in a very public way. Like, posting on social media, or that particular instance was on a YouTube channel, right?
Yeah.
So it was, it was like, okay, I have to make the decision as to whether or not I want people like my husband's family to know this information, which, for them could be a very complicated thing to hear too, right? Because if you don't know that about a person, and, I wasn't explicitly open about my sexuality before Mark.
Right.
We were, it was a very kind of touchy subject for me to kind of say, okay, am I willing to go there?
Yeah. Answer the questions from wherever they come from. Like, putting it that publicly, here we are, like, speaking into microphones for the world to hear.
And
means
talking
that,
about bisexual. Like
you might have somebody come to you and it's uncomfortable when you're like, oh, I kind of didn't really want you to know that.
Well, this is the thing, though. I think that I'm fine with that now, right? Like, I'm okay with that now.
Right.
I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't okay with that.
Of course.
And when I made that decision, I went, actually, you know what? Fuck it. Like, I'm fine with it. Like, I get that it's complicated. I get you might not understand given, what you know about me as a person, or what you assume about me as a person. And I understand that, but I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care because it's who I am. And I think like the zero fucks version of me is kind of like, we're in that zero fuck stage of my life.
Yes. Yes. We transitioned simultaneously. I do recall. I feel like there is also, with the whole zero fucks, I find, at least from my perspective, sometimes I'm just like, if I am finding out through the grapevine because I spoke about my queerness online that you have a problem, I probably don't want to know you.
Right.
Like, and it's not that I won't love you if you're family, I won't love you if you're friends, but we were actually just talking about this. I had a family member refuse to come to mine and my partner's wedding next year because they don't believe in gay marriage. One, I was shocked because I wasn't expecting it. But two, I was kind of like, well, I don't really want you at the wedding anyway. Like, even if you apologized and changed your mind, I would revoke your invite. I'm not welcoming to people who believe in those negative, unloving things into my life.
Yeah. And like, make all the assumptions you want about me. But if you find out the truth about me and you're not happy about it, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
We're done.
Yeah. I'm not living my life for you.
Yeah.
Aunt Sue. Just like a random, like it could even be a random person who just decides to have an opinion on your life.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Scary. I think so. One of the biggest reasons, or like the main reason why I thought to bring you on this episode, why I knew this episode would work for you, is because I know that you took a really long time to come out to your children.
Yeah.
And I actually knew Karen before she came out to her kids. And then hilariously, one of her kids like beat her to the punch and came out before she even was able to come out to them. So I just want to talk about that. Tell me more about your thought process and the decision. Like, why did you wait, and what happened for the moment where it finally felt like the right time?
So why I waited, kids they have a long list of things they have to learn in life, right? And having loving parents, regardless of gender, and if they have a loving, beautiful household, that's really, really important. But you don't really find out about your parents' past partners until you're much older, right? Nobody actually wants to know that about their parents. Like, it's gross.
Yeah. I was like, I knew it and I didn't want to.
Yeah. It's like, oh, these are things you can't unhear.
Yeah.
So that was part of it, right? Like, it's a matter of, this is not privileged information for them yet.
Yeah.
And then the added bit was, how do you explain that you chose a man instead of a woman? And like, there's a whole long list of questions that come with it that I wasn't, I didn't think was an appropriate conversation at their age.
Right.
And it's not like, like, welcome baby. Hi, I'm your mommy. This is your daddy.
Yeah.
He's straight. I'm bi.
Bi-con.
Any questions?
Yeah.
No, it's just not a conversation that you have when they're little.
Yeah. Well, and I know factually also, it's not like you hid the conversation of like queerness and the existence of gay people from your kids whatsoever.
God, no. Yeah, no, we're obviously a very open family. Well, maybe not obviously, but we're a very open family, like in the way that we talk about sexuality and, and everything else in between, I'm sure. Food, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, but it was the challenge of trying to figure out, like, now when do I do it? If I do it, why should I do it? Does it matter if I do it? Like, there was all these questions, and it mattered to me that they knew, because they have to understand that their parents are complete people. Yeah. Right? Like, the bubble that is my life with them is not just who I am. It's not just my experience. And, we were joking last weekend with some friends about some, shenanigans that we did when we were young, right? Like, those stories start to come out as your kids get older. And I knew that eventually some of those stories were going to come out. So I might as well be honest and truthful. So when it happened, it was an interesting experience. So like you said, my youngest came out to us before, I came out to them. And it was, we went to a Pride event, actually. So, obviously my husband and I are very supportive of our kids, and we're supportive of our Pride community. Like, we're diving right in and kind of, even though we're a small town, it's important to have presence there, right? Yeah. So my youngest and I went to a Pride event, and we were just having laughs and having a good time, and it just felt like the right moment to say, hey, like, just so you know, I'm bisexual. And they were like, yeah, that kind of makes sense to me. I'm like, all right.
Damn it. Really? This is me hearing this for the first time. I knew this had happened, and I was like, wait for the podcast. I want to hear the story. So they were just like, cool.
Yeah. They were like, yeah, cool. That makes sense. Like, you're really, really open. And I think I get it now. I'm like, well, I mean, people can be open without having to be, bisexual, but yeah, that's the why, babe. Yeah. So, it was very easy.
Wholesome.
Really, really wholesome.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, this kid, they spent the early part of the pandemic, like those rare times where you could actually go out and have like a meal outdoors as a family. There was this one time this kid just like basically told us all the different levels of fluidity that we, being elder people, elder compared to them, particularly, like, we were just like, what? Like, I don't know what this term means, or this term means, or this term means.
I love those conversations.
This was like, this kid was just basically diving into all the juicy terms that they had learned throughout the pandemic, being online with friends. And so we just, I think that conversation, that juicy, terminology conversation, just kind of led into the ability that it made it more comfortable that I could actually say, okay, at some point I'm going to say this to the kids, and they don't give a shit.
Yeah. Which is the best response. I remember, like, I always tell this story where I remember I came out to my dad. I didn't make a big deal about it. I was just like, hey, Dad, I'm dating so-and-so. He goes, okay, why didn't you empty the dishwasher? Because you said you were going to do that. And I was like, oh, it's really that little of a deal to you that he wasn't even like, he had no questions for me other than like, why didn't you do your chores? And I was like, that is a blessing in disguise, truly. Like, it's a good response. Oh, yeah. So how did you tell your eldest if you only told your youngest at this Pride event? Did you come home and you're like, well, now I gotta tell them?
No, you know what, like, with him it was just more just really cash. Like, I feel like we were just in the car, right? Like, it's a less memorable story, to be honest, because I feel like once it was out with the youngest is a very enthusiastic person, so like, it's just hard to keep all the information quiet. That's why I'm asking this question. Like, so there's no way they would have kept that a secret for you. And I don't I'm sure if I had asked them, right, I think that they would have, but with their oldest, he was just like, sure, whatever. Like,
why are you telling me, Mom?
Very much like, why are you telling me? I don't care. Like, but it wasn't like I get that. Like, he was just he was just very him.
I was wondering if Karen and I we did an event, I don't know, a couple Prides ago, virtually. Karen moderated and I spoke on a panel about like inclusive communications for Pride Month in like corporate world. I told you we were corporate baddies. It was fun. It was really good. But I was curious about like, were you ever worried that your kids would maybe find that before you had the opportunity to talk to them, or find any of these sort of like small instances of you outing yourself publicly for work to create safe spaces, and that it would cause any sort of ripples?
No, because I think they didn't care much
right
about what I was doing for work,
right.
to be honest. So I think that I really wasn't, I didn't have concern, because I think that they would probably like, and it didn't happen, right? Like they just didn't spend time in those spaces. Although interestingly, like years and years ago, I had posted on my Facebook about being bi, and it was in response to somebody else's post. So it wasn't like I was like, just saying, hi, I'm bisexual on my, like, how are you feeling today?
Right.
But it was in response to a girlfriend, and she had questions about people who were bisexual. She's a journalist, so it was relevant.
Right.
It was just like, I have questions about
yeah.
bisexuality. But it was, and I said, like, because I'm married with kids, being bisexual is, complicated. And it was one of those where my husband said to me, he's like, are you worried that people are going to see that? And at the time I was like, it's not a big deal. But then I did consider, like, eventually if my kids got onto Facebook and I hadn't had this conversation, and then I realized that Facebook became completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
And it's
Gen
not a big
Zs
deal.
Don't care about Facebook.
Exactly.
I use it as like a photo album,
right?
And to talk to my nana.
Yeah, exactly.
So have you ever been in a situation where like your openness to talk about it, or your willingness to not only out yourself, but just speak openly about why it's important to talk about this? Have you ever kind of gotten in trouble with that, or had an ill response to your openness? Maybe
not like an ill response, but I guess, I am protective, especially when I start to talk about my sexuality or my kids, or anything like that. Like I tend to be a little bit more reserved about who I speak to.
Yeah.
So this could be interesting after this, but I don't know. I think that like anybody I have spoken to about it's pretty okay.
Good.
I've been very lucky. I know that's not the experience for a lot of people. And I think that, if I was in a lesbian relationship and said I was bisexual, I think that would probably be a harder conversation in some ways.
It can be.
Yeah. And that's the experience I've heard from other people, not obviously something I've experienced, but also I think that when you're in a quote unquote straight relationship, you don't really talk about the fact that you have any other sexuality other than being straight. Right. So it's not something that comes up a lot either. Right. So I think if I could imagine talking to, maybe some of the more religious people in my life, or some of the less
welcoming,
or even just knowledgeable people in my life, right? Who just don't get, well, how can you be bi if you're married, right?
Yeah.
Then I think that if I led more with my sexuality, I suppose that might come up a bit more. But I guess because I don't know, it's who I am, but my sexuality, regardless of who I'm sleeping with, it's not the only thing.
Yeah. I feel like I can speak on like back in my early gay years where I was bi.
Right.
And just, that is how I truly identified in the moment. I was still dating serially women, which should have been a sign to me early on, but it wasn't. And that's totally fine, because everyone's journey is their own. However, I faced some of those, like people being like, what do you mean you're bi? Like, you're dating a woman, you're a lesbian. And I'm like, well, it's more complicated than that. But technically it's like a lesbian relationship in the same way that you went quote unquote straight relationship. Right. And then the terms that you're saying, like your kid probably spoke about, the more we have it depends on what side of the road you're on, whether it makes the conversation easier or harder.
Yeah.
Because like you said, you wouldn't have necessarily said, oh, I'm bi in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
You knew you liked women, you knew you liked men, but there wasn't a word that made sense and that was talked about a lot.
Well, yeah, it definitely existed,
Yeah.
right? But it wasn't something that people identified as.
Right.
Like or even the concept of identifying wasn't even a thing
Right.
then, right? So, yeah, it's you were gay, you were straight,
Yeah.
but you might have been in between,
Yeah.
right? High, but
Yeah.
I don't know that people declared it. Definitely they did, and they were probably braver souls than me for sure. But also I didn't know what I didn't know.
I think there is also this air of like, if you're in between, you're still figuring it out, and like people are like, oh, there's space for that, like you just don't know yet.
Right.
And then I do think that
she what was it that she tried it out in college, like that
right,
concept,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
And the what I think is a common path for a lot of people who do identify as queer, lesbian, gay, to kind of go through with the journey, so to speak, of like coming out as bisexual first and recognizing that and accepting that within themselves. And then maybe if that changes, that is a common place for people who identify, at least I can speak on my behalf of like lesbian, and the fact that I just surround myself with lesbians all the time. So I know that they feel the same way, where a lot of us said we were bi at first. And it doesn't mean that that's untrue, but I think the fact that bisexuality can sometimes lead to finding your sexuality in another term,
right,
doesn't help the bi erasure, because like I did you a disservice by being like, just kidding, I'm a lesbian.
no, yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. And that's the thing, right, where I guess it can be a comfortable spot for people to begin with. I think that's true. It's very comfortable for me it would be very comfortable for me just to say I'm straight.
Yeah.
It would be very easy, very, very easy. And I think that like, I'm okay with the discomfort now.
Yeah.
Right. I think that that's the thing about like, you can have monogamy, you can have, a male partner, you can have kids, you can have all these things. You live in the lovely house, you're having your beautiful life. And then you can also say, this is my truth.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think that that's where I am now.
Yeah. In your fuck it era.
Yeah. Zero fucks. Man.
Zero fucks. I really love
fucks,
that.
Yeah.
So why, just in your personal opinion, why do you feel like this bisexuality as a topic can be hard for people to talk about?
Well, I think it depends on the circumstance. Circumstances, I think, is the number one reason why it's hard to talk about, right? Because if you're in a gay relationship, you're male or female, and you've chosen, same-sex partners, that's hard to talk about because, have you been with an opposite sex? Is that an issue?
Suddenly people think they can ask you what you're up to in bed all the time.
Right.
As soon as your sexuality comes about.
There's the idea that like, oh wow, well, you could be really dirty in bed then, or you could be, this could be, what's your sex life like then?
Yeah.
It's like,
you don't ask regular.
Actually,
it's
pretty boring. But,
but I just like
boring,
once,
but.
Once I feel like sexuality comes into play, people feel like they're like allowed to ask some really like abrasive questions.
Yeah.
And my problem is like, I'll answer them. I'm like, I'll tell you what I get up to in bed. However, why, like, it only falls in tandem with, I feel like, LGBTQ plus conversations. Like, you're not like, and my husband, and they're like, and so how do you fuck?
Yeah. Missionary.
Nothing wrong with it.
Well, it's one of the cards you can play in the deck, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, I think, like, yes, the straight community doesn't necessarily talk a lot about what you're up to in bed, unless it's with like the girlfriends.
Yeah.
The girlfriends scene kind of does it a little bit, which once again, I think is even more so. It happens more as you get older.
Yeah.
Because now you're starting to recognize, oh, there's things that are different about my sex life than they used to be when I was in my 20s or whatever. Right. So it's like, oh, now I can talk about this a little bit with the girlfriend scene.
Well, and even the term girlfriends, like people in my generation don't use that to talk about their friends that are girls. Because I'm like, are you gay or are you friends?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I feel like your generation and above use that as a term for like just the friends that are girls.
Friends that are girls.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when I say girlfriends in this situation, I mean friends that are girls.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the type of thing. Like now, like as I'm older, you know, and my girlfriends and I will talk about, you know, what's going on in bed a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But before, no. And I'm around the dudes. I don't think that comes. It does when you're a very, very, very tight group
Right.
of friends. But I would say generally, super general term, like you're not like as couples going out for dinner and talking about what's going on in the bedroom.
Meanwhile, like if you listened to the sex episode, we like talk about how we like coached our one lesbian friend through like where to put her legs at like a brunch table. It was incredible. You'll hear the story in that episode, but I feel like I'm getting a little glimpse into a world I don't know, the straights, or straight passings.
Yeah.
Being you.
And that's the thing. Like how many times have I texted you and said, oh my God, here's a funny story from my straight passing life.
Yeah.
Where I'm, you know, totally checking out this chick and my husband's like, dude, like you gotta tap the brakes a little bit. And I'm like, okay, so sorry.
Right. Whoops. People don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, the rainbow earrings giving me away, like
yeah, or the up and down look. Right. I think like just to close us out, I think it's really important to say like thank you on my behalf and the behalf of like a lot of queer folks who like you are an impressive person in work, in life, in your community, and the fact that you are open and out. I know how comfortable it made me to be in your presence and to feel like I had somebody in my corner. And I do feel like the discomfort that you're talking about, like, oh, I have to work through this discomfort now and it's uncomfortable, but I'm doing it and I'm telling people it does make a really big difference. I hope you see it.
I do. And I think that like in my experience with you and a few other colleagues along the way and other friends, like I've seen the difference, and that's made it a really positive experience for me. And I'm really thankful and happy that I've made the decision to talk about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's the whole gig on this podcast.
Say it, I dare you.
Say it, I dare you. You just talk about the hard things and then other people find it less hard.
Yeah.
That's kind of the goal, at least we hope. Well, Karen, thank you for having this conversation and for spending time with me today. Where can listeners find you on the interwebs?
You can find me on Insta at KEAB Chalmers. That's probably the best place.
Yeah. She's got a good Instagram. You can find us at Say It I Dare You Pod on Instagram and TikTok as well, or follow my personal Instagram at Quinn Palmer. Please, if you made it this far, give us a download or leave a review on the podcast. We would really appreciate it. It helps us out a lot. Also, if you happen to have like an episode idea or want to be a guest or know someone who'd be super down to be on this podcast, just shoot us a little DM on Instagram. We would be happy to entertain it. Thank y'all for listening, and thank you, Karen, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, and we'll see you next week.
Ciao.
Bye.